Lent is drawing to a close, and one of the stories that hasn't really stopped happening in the church is this renewal that they call, more like revolution in the church, this synodal movement. It continues on with stories trickling in of group meetings here and there, talking about all these ways the church could be improved, as if the church had never really lived up to its potential, which sounds blasphemous to me when the way they say it, but none of this is new. There's been a call to democratize the church for decades, basically since Vatican II. You're going to hear Malachi Martin warn you about this first in his own words, a clip that I played recently in a live stream, a very short one, followed by an excerpt from a famous but underread book of his called The Jesuits, the book that changed his life forever. Before he published it, there wasn't a lot of pushback against him. After he published The Jesuits, which detailed how the Jesuits were the ones who were like the lifeblood of the Roman Curia, controlling access to the Pope and trying to destroy the papacy and everything else. After he published that, the smear campaign against him began. Always with one degree of separation to the Jesuits, the organization of the Jesuits. It's not hard to do the math on this. But here's Malachi Martin describing for you in his own words, in his own voice, this change in the church. He said this in the early 1990s.
Now, you made a comment every once in a while you read a line in a book and you go, this is the most right-on thing I've read in years. When I was reading Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church, there was a one-line comment that went something like, the reason that many Catholics can't figure out what's going on inside of their church is because the vocabulary is still the same, but the actual meaning now imputed to those words is totally different.
That's right. That's one of the terrible things that have happened to us. You see, John, in the Roman Catholic Church, to a large extent, they have kept, the masters of the liturgy, of the ceremonies, have kept many of the phrases and many of the sentences and words traditionally used, but there's a different meaning ascribed to them. The result is that, and that meaning is taught in schools and taught out of pulpits, and it's not a Catholic meaning. The result is that slowly but surely the mass of Catholics have been weaned away from the Catholic meaning of things to another meaning which is, I don't know what it is, it's not Catholic anyway. It's halfway between a form of mild Protestantism plus a bit of New Ageism. You know, it's a funny mixture because the schism, the breakup within the Catholic Church entails both sort of watered-down Protestantism and a lot of New Ageism.
In the following remarkable passage from the Jesuits, Malachi Martin presents us with a sort of what-if scenario. He presents to you from the perspective of a typical lay Catholic, witnessing the changes in the church. Having heard that clip I just played for you of him explaining the revolution in the church, this desire to change the religion itself, take what he says here and see if it sounds eerily familiar to the time we live in. This is from the Jesuits, pages 244 to 250, for those keeping score. Put yourself in the position of a born and bred city dweller setting out for work on the route you have used every morning for years. You've done it hundreds of times, 5 days a week, for who knows how many weeks, year after year. All is so unexpected, so predictable, so reassuring that no matter what the noise or what the jagged movement of street things, in a certain sense, all of it ensures your peace of mind. Around that well-known corner, it will be the same as it always was. This is what you assume unconsciously. But picture yourself turning that corner and being suddenly seized from behind by a blasting high wind that comes from seeming nowhere, and in its hurricane passage shatters buildings, leveling some of them, throwing people about, littering pavements, uprooting trees, as it carries you off willy-nilly with everyone and everything else in dizzying directions. This is a change so total, so abrupt, so irresistible, in fact, that you no longer know where you are, where you're going, what is happening. Then another high wind interlacing with the first comes screaming incoherently around your ears and seems to affect most people around you with a sort of ecstatic joy. So eerie is the effect of the second blast that even in all the violence and turmoil, the most disorienting thing of all for you is The strange euphoria of expectation and joyous confidence that seems to grip most of the people who are being tossed about. A bizarre element of this disturbing euphoria is the way that people begin to talk, whether among themselves or to God. They seem in an instant to have learned a new language, with pop-up prefab concepts. Don't worship vertically, worship horizontally. Whatever helps creative growth toward integration. Wild questions assault you. Why was there no warning? Why is everyone so euphorically confident about the future? Is their joyous leap forward into darkness informed by their instinct for the divine? Such a scenario, wild and surreal as it seems, is barely enough to convey the completeness and the suddenness of the change and the strange euphoria which overpowered Roman Catholics and, surprisingly, Jesuits along with them in the 1960s. For an entire traditional way of religious life and practice was seemingly swept away that suddenly without warning. A centuries-old mentality was flushed out in a hurricane of change. In one sense, a certain world of thought, feeling, attitude ceased to exist. The old Catholic world centered on the authority of the Roman pontiff, the cast iron either-or of Catholic dogma and morality, the frequentation of Mass, confession, Holy Communion, the Rosary, and the various pieties and devotions of parish life, the militancy of the Roman Catholic laity in defense of traditional Catholic values. That entire world was swept away, as it were, overnight. When the violence of the winds had passed and the new day dawned, people looked about and found that suddenly the universal Latin of the Mass was gone. Stranger still, the Roman Mass itself was gone. In its place, there was a new rite that resembled the old immemorable Mass as a lean-to shanty resembles a Palladian mansion. The new rite was said in a babble of languages, each one saying different things that sounded un-Catholic, that only God the Father was God, for example, and that the new rite was a community supper, not an enactment of Christ's death on the cross, and that priests were no longer priests of sacrifice, but ministers at table serving guests at a common meal of fellowship. The devastation of those hurricane winds had not stopped there. Churches and chapels, convents and monasteries had been denuded of statues. Altars of sacrifice had been removed or at least abandoned, and four-legged tables were planted in front of the people instead, as for a pleasant meal. Tabernacles were removed along with the fixed belief about Christ's sacrifice as the essence of the Mass. Vestments were modified or laid aside completely. Communion rails were removed. The faithful were told not to kneel any longer when receiving Holy Communion, but to stand like free men and women, and to take the bread of communion and the cup of grape of fellowship in their own democratic hands. In many churches, members of the congregation were immediately expelled for public disturbance of worship if they dared to genuflect, or worse still, to kneel for Holy Communion in the new rite. Outside the churches, altar cloths, mass vestments, communion rails, even pulpits, statues, and kneelers, as well as stations of the cross, were either consigned to bonfires or city dumps or sold off at public auctions, where interior designers picked them up at bargain prices and launched an ecclesiastical look in the decoration of high-rise apartments in the elegant homes of suburbia. A carved oak altar made such an unusual vanity table. Attendance at Mass immediately declined, and within 10 years was down by 30% in the U.S., 60% in France and Holland, 50% in Italy, 20% in England and Wales. Within another 10 years, 85% of all Catholics in France, Spain, Italy, and Holland never went to Mass. Seminary populations plummeted. In Holland, 2,000 priests and 5,000 religious brothers and nuns abandoned their ministries. Similar declines were registered everywhere. In the 12 years 1965 to 1977, some 12 to 14,000 priests worldwide asked to be relieved of their duties, or they simply left. 60,000 nuns left their convents between 1966 and 1983. The Catholic Church had never suffered such devastating losses in such a short time. Very many teaching nuns simply doffed their religious habits, quickly acquired lay clothes, cosmetics, jewelry, and said goodbye to the local bishops who had hitherto been their major superiors, declared themselves now constituted as ordinary, decent, straightforward American educators, and carried on their teaching careers. Conversions to Catholicism were cut by 2/3. Those who remained, lay and clerical, were not satisfied with the attempted abolition of the traditional Roman Mass, with the overall changes of Catholic ritual and worship, and with newly exercised freedom to cast doubt on all dogmas. It wasn't enough. A clamor arose in favor of the use of contraception, of divorce and remarriage within the church, of a married clergy, of women's ordination, of a quick patchwork union with the Protestant churches, or of communist revolution as a means not only of solving endemic poverty, but of defining faith itself. Backing up this motley array of changes and changers and changelings, there came marching in a whole phalanx of feisty experts, theologians, philosophers, liturgical experts, facilitators, socio-religious coordinators, lay ministers, male and female, praxis directors, whatever their pop-up titles, all were looking for two things: converts to the new theology and a fight with the battered and retreating traditionalists. A flood of publications, books, magazines, articles, bulletins, newsletters, plans, programs, and outlines inundated the popular Catholic market. The experts questioned and reinterpreted every dogma and belief traditionally and universally held by Catholics. Everything, in fact, and especially all the hard things in Roman Catholic belief, penance, chastity, fasting, obedience, submission, were subjected to violent overnight change. Throughout seminaries, a more subtle but still obvious weeding out went on. Older, traditionally minded men were retired early or simply retired themselves in disgust. They were replaced only with devotees of the renewal. The word was always capitalized in those early days. With a blast of euphoria, there arose among them those who were left the brave, if not always convincing idea that the future of Catholicism, so abruptly reduced in its practice and numbers, was now somehow brighter than ever before. What seemed a shambles was really a vast Pentecostal renewal underway. The real Church of Christ was about to emerge in all its beauty and truth. An immediate consequence was the insistent demand for democratization to replace central authority and bring a new and much-needed order throughout the length and breadth of the Church. Priests organized themselves into leagues and associations and senates and unions on a national and religious basis. Nuns did likewise. The laity, men and women separately, followed suit. He may have said those things in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, but it sounds like today. What do we hear about synodality? This top-down decentralization of the church, the lifting up the voices of the laity, and all this other stuff. The Catholic Church is a hierarchical church. Jesus knew what he was doing when he built the church on the rock of Peter and had the Holy Spirit guide the church into development of a hierarchical organization full of pomp and splendor and militant poverty at the same time. I'm curious what you have to say about this. Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So just sharing this social media, that helps too. And I hope these days of fasting and penance as we get ready for Easter just around the corner are fruitful for you. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.